Part 1. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 1. Xianxia Mountain is located in the inland of Yunzhou. There is no grass growing below the mountainside, so it is named this way. But above the mountainside, there are towering ancient trees and misty clouds. It is said that there are psychic beasts and strange flowers and plants. Therefore, there is a village with dozens of families on the mountainside, relying on hunting and collecting herbs for a living. When a broker comes, they can exchange money and rice, and their lives are boundless and free. Until today, some strange guests suddenly came to the village. They were dressed in luxurious clothes and generous. They summoned all the able-bodied men in the village, distributed money, and asked them to lead the way to the mountains and forests. There were no adults in the village, so the children had no one to discipline them. They played around in groups of 3 or 5. Among them, 3 boys of similar age, about 10 years old, were sneaking along a narrow path to the top of the mountain. "Xiaozhu, do you think they are really immortals?" a boy with pigtails said cautiously. Xiaozhu said nonchalantly, "Where are there immortals in this world? I think the immortal Banban is more like it. My father said that they are immortal masters, they are different." "Then where are you taking us now?" The other boy with a round head and only a small hair on his forehead wiped his nose, his face full of curiosity. "The red fruits on the top of the cliff are ripe, I can't reach them, you help pull a rope, I will climb down to pick them." As soon as Xiaozhu finished speaking, the 2 swallowed their saliva first, and then their faces changed. The braided kid said anxiously, "You can't go to the top of the cliff. My dad passed by there a while ago and smelled a foul smell. He said someone must have died there." "Yes, yes, yes," the round-headed kid shook his head like a rattle, "I heard my dad say that he didn't dare to go there either. What if a dead person turns into a ghost? What should we do?" Xiaozhu said nonchalantly, "There are no immortals, so where do the ghosts come from? If you don't go, I'll eat those dozens of red fruits all by myself." When they heard that there were dozens of fruits, the 2 children stared and swallowed their saliva. The red fruits were bright red and tasted especially sweet. And after eating them, they felt warm and comfortable all over, and they had endless energy. Seeing the reactions of the 2 people, Xiaozhu knew that they must have been persuaded, so he quickened his pace and walked towards the top of the cliff. Half an hour later, the 3 of them arrived at the agreed top of the cliff. Looking out, they saw the afterglow of the setting sun and the clouds, but below was a bottomless abyss. Xiaozhu untied a bundle of hemp rope from his waist, and tied a knot around his waist and thighs several times, then handed the other end to the 2. Then he pointed to the direction of the cliff and said, "I'm going down from here, you hold on tight." "Xiaozhu, no. What if you fall down?" Hearing that Xiaozhu was going to climb down the cliff, the 2 children were terrified. "I'm not afraid, why are you afraid? This rope is used by my father for hunting. Even a wild boar weighing 300 kilograms can't break it. How much do I weigh?" Xiaozhu said nonchalantly, "You tie the other end to the big rock. Today we finally have a chance to steal the rope." Seeing that Xiaozhu had made all the preparations, the 2 had no choice but to tie the rope as Xiaozhu said. Then they watched Xiaozhu walk to the edge of the cliff, crouch down, and slide down the cliff holding the rope tightly. But no one expected that Xiaozhu and his companions had tied the rope, but ignored the middle part that kept rubbing back and forth on the edge of the cliff. About an incense stick, Xiaozhu slid to the crevice of the cliff. He had just picked a branch with more than 10 red berries and put it in his mouth, and the rope could not support it and broke in the middle. He fell weightlessly, and the whole person was like a fool. He only thought in his mind that if he hadn't been greedy, he wouldn't have ended up in such a situation. But just as the thought came up, his back hit a stone slab heavily, and he grimaced in pain. He couldn't help but wonder, "I fell to the bottom of the valley now." He had never been out of the mountain and didn't know how deep the mountain was. Xiaozu quickly climbed up and found that he was actually on a protruding natural stone slab in the cliff. The previous red berries branch didn't fall down. The surroundings were filled with mist, but the cold wind in the mountains made him particularly clear about his current situation. This stone slab is only the size of a small bed. When lying down, there is no feeling, but when standing up, it is like standing on a cliff. If you are not careful, you will fall down again. Xiaozu carefully bent down, holding the red fruit branch in his mouth and leaning towards the edge of the cliff. After climbing 2 steps, he was surprised to find that there was a cave behind the water mist. In the cave, there was a faint flash of white light. He was curious. Could it be a treasure like a night pearl? Thinking of this, he hurriedly climbed into the cave and looked along the light. He found that it was a piece of glass mirror. As soon as he pinched it with 2 fingers, he immediately felt a sharp pain like a knife cutting between his fingers. He hurriedly shook his hand, trying to shake it off and then put it in his mouth to stop the bleeding, but he was horrified to find that the fragment seemed to be stuck on his hand. "Oh my God, there is a ghost!" After screaming, he shook his hand in panic, but he couldn't get rid of it at all. At the same time, the blood on his hand rushed into the mirror even more frantically. An inexplicable fear surged into his heart. He rolled his eyes and fainted. After an unknown amount of time, Xiaozu woke up. He could see that he was still in the cave, but the strange glass mirror was gone. "I was so scared." He stroked his chest lightly, raised his head to observe, and suddenly stood there in shock. There are traces of people living in the cave. Stone benches, stone tables, stone beds, and stone chairs are all available. Is there really an immortal? Xiaozu was panicked and knelt down involuntarily, kowtowed 3 times and 9 times, and said very piously, "Immortal, I, Zuyun, have mistakenly entered the immortal palace. Please forgive me. I will leave here when De Go and go find someone to rescue me." After saying that, he raised his head. The cave was as quiet as before, and there was no reaction at all. So the immortal is not here. Zuyun patted his chest and saw a green jade slip on the table. The immortal suicide note? Zuyun saw that it was good looking, so he went over and picked up the jade slip. Suddenly, a green light came out of the jade slip and rushed directly into Zuyun's mind. A series of unfamiliar information instantly emerged in his mind. After a moment, Zuyun was stunned. The broken glass mirror was actually a fragment of a supreme magic weapon, called Dea Glass Mirror. Because it absorbed Zuyun's blood essence and bound to it for the first time, it sucked him into it. If he wants to go out, he only needs to think about it. Zuyun's eyes turned, and he silently said "go out" in his heart. In an instant, he felt his mind empty, and the scenery in front of him changed, and he immediately returned to the original cave. All the tables, chairs, cabinets, and beds disappeared without a trace. Moreover, there was a piece of thing in his hand, which was the fragment of the glass mirror. "It's really a treasure." Zuyun was overjoyed, and when he was about to try again, he suddenly found a red fruit at his feet. He was slightly stunned and felt a little strange. After picking the red fruit, it must be eaten within half an hour, otherwise it will become dry and bitter, and it will not produce a warm current after eating, and the body will not have strength. But at this time, it was exactly the same as when he first entered the cave. Strange, did I just faint for a short while? Zuyun scratched his head, a little confused, so he simply picked 10 and ate them in one bite. Although the red tangerines are small, you can't eat too many, otherwise your stomach will be bloated and uncomfortable, and it will hurt for 3 days and 3 nights. Zuyun has suffered a lot before. It's okay for him, but the other 2 companions can only eat 3 and 4 respectively. 1 more is not allowed. The red tangerines melted in his mouth, and Zuyun planned to sit down and digest them well as usual. Feeling the warm current coming from his brain, he suddenly thought, isn't there a bed in this magic weapon? Why should I sit when I can lie down? Thinking of this, Zuyun's mind moved again, and he appeared in the space inside the mirror. As soon as he lay down, he felt sleepy. After yawning a few times, he fell asleep. I don't know how long it took. Zuyun woke up refreshed, touched his stomach, and the red tangerines should have been digested. According to his usual experience, this is a full night of sleep. I don't know if Big Dog and Second Dog have come to find my dad. Muttering to himself, Zuyun returned to the cave out of thin air, and it seemed that he stepped on something. Huh! Looking at the bright red tangerine, Zuyun frowned immediately. No, why is this tangerine not deflated yet? He picked up the tangerine in surprise, smelled it first, and the fragrance dissipated a little, but it was still edible. Thinking for a moment, he carefully picked one and put it in his mouth, and a familiar fragrance and warmth slowly filled his body. Try another one. Zuyun swallowed the second one with doubts. Then the third, the fourth. Until the 10th one, he didn't taste the taste of the tangerine spoiled. No, I slept all night. Zuyun muttered, and an idea suddenly appeared in his mind. He divided the tangerine in his hand into two parts, leaving one in the cave, and he took the other half into the space inside the mirror. This time he did not lie on the stone bed, but sat, staring at the red fruits until the fragrance of the red fruits dissipated, turned black and shrunken, and then returned to the cave. Looking at the red fruits left in the cave, which had only lost a little color, his breathing became a little rapid. The time in Dao's glass mirror is different from the time outside. He spent almost a night, while outside, it was less than half an hour. This is a treasure, Zuyun was excited, and he would never be afraid of wasting red fruits again. Don't let Daegu and Ergu know. Zuyun went back and forth several times, and he felt that almost 2 or 3 days had passed, and then he thought that he was still trapped in the cave. If someone came to rescue, it would be troublesome if they couldn't find him. So he leaned against the stone wall of the cave to survive the night until dawn, when the sound of the wind mixed with the calls of Daegu and Ergu came from outside the cave. I'm here, I'm here. Zuyun was overjoyed and ran to the natural stone slab outside the cave and responded loudly. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to inform us. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 2. After shouting, Zuyun leaned against the cliff wall at the entrance of the cave and looked up. The mist had not yet dissipated, but a white light broke through the air like a cloud crown. A closer look revealed that it was a long sword, and what was even more surprising was that there was a Taoist standing on the long sword. Immortal. Zuyun thought to himself that it was not good. Could it be that the owner of the treasure had returned? When he knelt down and prepared to present the fragments of the glass mirror in person, the Taoist was already standing on the natural stone slab. The mountain wind was rustling, and Zuyun had not spoken yet, only to hear the Taoist say, "You are so lucky, you fell on this stone slab and didn't die." Zuyun looked up and was stunned. The Taoist's clothes were shabby, his collar and cuffs were all muddy, and he was holding a wine gourd in his hand. If he hadn't seen him falling from the sky with his own eyes, Zuyun would have almost thought that he was just a sloppy liar who told fortunes on the street. The Taoist looked at the cliff as if it were a flat ground, walked quickly to Zuyun, and grabbed his wrist. After a moment, the Taoist laughed, "Not bad, not bad, there is spiritual power flowing in the body. This time, I am really lucky, I met 3 good kids at once." After that, the Taoist raised the wine gourd, raised his head and took a big sip. In a good mood, he did not let go of Zuyun's hand, and made a strange gesture with the other hand. He shouted in his mouth, and the long sword suddenly flew over. I felt that my feet were suddenly empty, and it turned out that the Taoist had jumped onto the long sword with Zuyun. Little guy, I will take you to heaven. The Taoist smiled, and seeing that Zuyun's face was pale, he did not comfort him, and flew away on the sword. Zuyun was so scared that he closed his eyes tightly, and only felt his eyelids tremble a few times, and his feet had already stepped on the solid stone slab. In my ears, the surprised voice of the big dog came. Xiaozu, it's so good that you're okay. I was scared to death. Iargo said anxiously, me too. Zuyun opened his eyes and was also very excited. Before he could speak, he heard the Taoist said, okay, you are brave kid. You dare to go down the cliff to pick the spiritual fruit. Go back and tell your father that I will take you with me. Zuyun didn't understand, so he raised his head and asked, Immortal master, where are you going? He already knew that this Taoist was the same as the person who came to the village before, and was the immortal master mentioned by his father. Of course we are going to cultivate immortality. Are we going to farm? The Taoist took another sip of wine and said, you all have spiritual roots. If you don't cultivate immortality, it's against the will of heaven. Moreover, cultivating immortality increases lifespan. If you don't cultivate immortality, you will turn into ashes in 100 years, but I can still be alive and kicking. The big dog pulled the corner of Zuyun's clothes and said happily, Xiaozu, yesterday the immortal master said he would take us to cultivate immortality, and my father jumped 3 feet high. The second dog nodded repeatedly and said, my father is the same. Following the Taoist all the way down the mountain, the big dog told the story of yesterday. It turned out that they saw Zuyun fall off the cliff and went back to the village for help. But there was no adult in the village, and they waited until the evening for someone to come back, and there was also this drunk Taoist. The Taoist saw the black light flowing between the foreheads of these two people, and their eyes were bright and energetic. After taking their pulses, he found that there was spiritual power in their bodies. How could the villagers in the mountains, who were not civilized, have spiritual power in their bodies? He sobered up immediately, and after asking carefully, he was overjoyed. It turned out that he had eaten the fulling fruit. Moreover, Zuyun, who fell off the cliff, had also eaten it. The fulling fruit is the red fruit they often eat. If a person with spiritual roots eats it, the medicinal power will turn into spiritual power and stay in the body for a short time. The Taoist slapped the wine gourd and swore that he would see the person alive and the corpse dead. Zuyun understood, and he was a little excited. He got a magic weapon yesterday, and he could go to cultivate immortals today. And he could go with Daegu Ergu, so he was not afraid of having no one to play with. He hurried back home, and Zuyun's father, Zurong, was looking forward to it. Seeing Zuyun return safely, he was overjoyed. Dad, the immortal master said that I can also go to cultivate immortals. I want to go with Daegu Ergu. Zuyun said impatiently. Zurong was slightly stunned, then said ecstatically, can you go too? Zuyun smiled and whispered in Zurong's ear, Dad, you underestimate me too much. Daegu and Ergu, 2 idiots, can do it, so can I. Zurong laughed and scolded, good boy, you 3 are great, but don't call me like that when you go to the immortal gate. Zuyun didn't care, Dad, don't worry, I found out on the way back that the fruits we usually eat are actually used to test spiritual roots. The 2 of them can only eat 3 or 4, but I can eat 10 at a time. I am definitely better than them. As soon as he finished speaking, the Taoist outside the house pushed the door open. He was going to come over to tell Zurong. Just when he heard Zuyun showing off to his father, his face suddenly darkened. Boy, can you eat 10? This is a bit troublesome. He picked up the wine gourd and drank a sip of wine. Zurong said anxiously, Master, why is my son in trouble? The Taoist said helplessly, this kid doesn't understand. The more fulling fruits he can eat, the worse his talent is. He can eat 10 at a time, maybe he doesn't even have all his spiritual roots. If he can have 5 spiritual roots, it would be a blessing from God. At this time, Dago and Ergo happened to arrive with their small bags. Hearing what they said, it seemed that Xiaozu couldn't go with them. The big dog was anxious at the moment. Master, if Xiaozu doesn't go, we won't go either. Ergo blushed and said, me too. The Taoist was speechless, thinking about the pros and cons, and then he had to say, well, I will take you to try. If you can detect 5 spiritual roots, I will keep you in the sect for the sake of those 2 kids. Zuyun thought, as long as he stayed in the sect, he would have a chance. No matter how poor their talent is, I can just study hard. With the Dao glass mirror, how can I be afraid of not being able to catch up with them? But this treasure must not be known to them. After saying goodbye to their families, the 3 kids wiped their tears and followed the Taoist down the mountain. But they were children after all, and they chased and played on the mountain road in a blink of an eye. The Taoist just followed behind them, drinking with a smile. Dago and Ergo must have good talents. Sending them to the sect to become apprentices must be a great achievement, and they can be exchanged for a lot of contributions from the sect to exchange for wine. But that kid, if he doesn't even have 5 spiritual roots, he can only be a chores in the outer sect if he wants to stay. After about half an hour, the 3 of them were a little tired of playing, so they walked to the Taoist and said, Master, Master, can't you fly? Why don't you take us to fly down? The Taoist's old face turned red, and he touched his lower abdomen. The dantian was empty, so he cursed in his heart, I am only at the 6th level of chi refining, and it's good enough to fly once. But he didn't want to lose his prestige in front of the 3 kids, so he could only raise the wine gourd and pretend to be profound. Drinking doesn't fly the sword, and flying the sword doesn't drink. Kids, I will take you on the road of cultivating immortals. Bring me more wine in the future. Zuyun wanted to say, didn't you drink when you said you would take me to the sky? But he felt that this was a rebuke to his face, which was very inappropriate, so he simply didn't say anything. At noon, the 4 of them finally arrived at the town at the foot of the mountain. The Taoist hired a carriage, and the 3 kids could sit down and rest. The carriage stopped and started, and the Taoist drank and boasted about the past with them, which made Zuyun and others fascinated and envious. They also knew that the Taoist's surname was Zhang Tianyuan. At dusk, the carriage finally arrived at the gate of Lingjian sect, and Zhang Tianyuan took them to the door of a small house on the side. Brother Zhang, why are you back just now? Outside the house, a young man saw this and hurried forward. Haha, this is not a good seedling on the road, it delayed some time, come and see what kind of spiritual roots the children brought by the senior brother have. The young man noticed that there were 3 children following the Taoist, so he took out 3 stones from his arms and let them hold them in their hands. A moment later, 2 lights, one gold and one green, appeared on the forehead of the big dog. It turned out to be a double spiritual root of gold and wood. Congratulations, senior brother! The young man exclaimed, and then looked at Ergu again. Not bad, 3 spiritual roots of wood, water, and earth. Senior brother Zhang, you have done a great job with these 2 children. Zhang Tianyuan laughed loudly, and then looked at Zuyun. I saw 5 colored light flowing above his head, and the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth were all present. He slapped Zuyun on the back, good guy, it's really 5 spiritual roots. Your luck is better than mine. The young man was stunned. 5 spiritual roots can only be a servant in the inner gate at most. How can you be lucky like this? Could it be that senior brother Zhang had an illegitimate child with a mortal after drinking? Thinking of this, the young man hurriedly said, congratulations, senior brother Zhang, since this child also has spiritual roots, then junior brother will arrange him to Uncle 7. Zhang Tianyuan was stunned and said, Uncle 7 has figured it out. He wants to accept a disciple. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 3. The junior brother first rang the small bell on the table to notify the door to come to recruit disciples. Then he smiled at Zhang Tianyuan and said, "Just a few days ago, the seventh junior uncle suddenly came out of the valley to inform me that there was a new disciple. If you are a beginner, send one to him." Zhang Tianyuan chuckled and said, "Uncle Seventh Master is really not picky. With his pigtails and round head, the other senior teachers and uncles will probably break their heads over it, but these 5 spiritual roots give him an advantage." The 3 children seemed to understand, but they also knew that they must be separated, and they were somewhat reluctant to leave. The big dog stepped forward and hugged Zuyun and said, "Xiaozu, don't worry, I will definitely come to see you when I have time." Ergu followed, "Me too." Zuyun blinked, "It's different now. You have to practice hard and don't let me surpass you." Zhang Tianyuan said with a smile, "Xiaozu Waer is right, you too have to practice hard. I'll have to count on you if I have good wine in the future." After that, he said to his junior brother, "I will personally send this kid to the 7th junior uncle, you can stay here and watch the fun." The junior brother smiled bitterly, knowing that the bustle was not good to watch. Maybe when those junior uncles got into a fight over someone, he would have to apply for a new table from the sect. After watching Zhang Tianyuan leave with Zuyun, he said to the 2 children, "My name is Qin Liken. After you become your disciple, you can call me Senior Brother Qin or Senior Brother Liken." The big dog reluctantly withdrew his eyes from a distance and said quickly, "I have met Senior Brother Qin, my name is Menbeishi." Ergu reacted a moment slower, opened his mouth and said, "I have also met Senior Brother Qin, my name is Zhou Huanghua." Qin Liken nodded with a smile, "Don't be formal, we will all be from the same sect from now on." On the mountain road, Zhang Tianyuan led Zuyun to a valley after twists and turns. The valley was filled with smoke, and there was a faint smell of sparks. Zuyun wanted to continue moving forward, but was held back by Zhang Tianyuan. "Boy, there's a formation here, wait a minute." Zuyun's heart tightened, and he heard Zhang Tianyuan shouting loudly to Gu Nei, "Uncle 7th, disciple Zhang Tianyuan, here is your apprentice." This sound was full of energy and echoed continuously in the valley. After a moment, a figure suddenly walked out of the smoke. "Zhang Tianyuan? Why did you send someone here? Where is Li Chang?" Zuyun raised his head carefully and saw the person in front of him. He was about 40 years old and was also wearing a Taoist robe. But with fluttering sleeves and a fairy-like spirit, he looks much more pleasing to the eye than Zhang Tianyuan. Zhang Tianyuan quickly bent down and bowed, "Hey, Uncle 7th Master, this time the disciple has taken in 3 children, and Li Cheng couldn't spare time, so the disciple personally sent him to you. Are you so kind? Take this bottle of wine and get out of here." Uncle 7th Master casually tossed a wine gourd. Zhang Tianyuan looked overjoyed. After taking it, he quickly flattered him and said, "Uncle 7th Master, this disciple has been craving this wine for 50 years. Then he winked at Zuyun and said, "Boy, Uncle 7th Master has not accepted a disciple for 100 years. This is your opportunity. Serve 7th Master Uncle well, do you understand?" After saying that, he walked away in a hurry. Zuyun felt disappointed, always feeling that Zhang Tianyuan brought him here in exchange for wine. He was clearly chatting and laughing on the way here, but in the blink of an eye he disappeared with his drink in his arms. "Boy, what kind of spiritual root do you have?" Seeing that Zhang Tianyuan was gone, Uncle 7th Master asked, and Zuyun immediately came back to his senses. "Back to Master, My disciple Zuyun, I just heard that it is the 5 spiritual roots. Zuyun quickly knelt down on the ground. 5 spiritual roots. Uncle 7th Master's face suddenly darkened, and he cursed, I haven't left the valley for 100 years, has the Lingjian sect even collected the 5 spiritual roots? Zuyun heard the anger from it and did not dare to make a sound. Uncle 7th Master changed his tone and sighed, oh, I can't blame others. Even if there are people with single spiritual roots and different spiritual roots, I can't defeat them, forget it, 5 spiritual roots will be 5 spiritual roots, just be obedient. Hearing this, Zuyun quickly said, Master, this disciple will definitely practice well and listen to Master's teachings. I'm not as good at fighting as others, practicing hard is useless. Uncle 7th scolded him again and said, my name is Sun Suanhua, don't go out of the valley if you have nothing to do. If you get beaten up in the valley, don't say that you are my disciple. Now, come in with me. Zuyun was stunned, practicing was useless, so why should I come here? And will the good people in this sect be beaten? He felt like he had been tricked by Zhang Tianyuan, but it was impossible to leave at this time. He could only bite the bullet and follow Sun Suanhua into the smoke. Boy, follow closely. If you lose track of me, don't blame you and me for not having a master-disciple relationship. Sun Suanhua's figure was clearly in front, but the voice seemed to be coming from all directions. Zuyun quickly cheered up and made an appointment for a cup of tea. Suddenly, his eyes suddenly opened up, like a paradise in the world. What you can see is a wooden house courtyard, complete with pavilions and pavilions. On the left side of the courtyard is a medicinal garden, in which a variety of flowers and plants are planted. The fragrances are gathered together, and the smell is refreshing. Next to the medicine garden, there is a waist-wide small channel. If you look carefully, you will see that the water flows slowly, and sometimes there are fish jumping out of the water. Sun Suanhua took out a piece of paper from his arms. This is the route map of the Mr. Ray in and out of the valley. I will go out to do some errands. I will come back in about 3 or 4 hours. If you know it by heart, I will teach you something. After saying that, Sun Suanhua returned and entered the mist formation. In a few days, he has personal matters to go to the back mountain for a visit, so he needs to apply to the sect master in person. But I was afraid that if he left, there would be no one to take care of him in the valley, so I wanted to accept him as a nominal apprentice. Now that he has Zuyun, he naturally has to make arrangements. Seeing that Sun Suanhua was gone, Zuyun circled around and found that he was the only one in the entire valley. Then he lowered his head and looked at the route map in his hand. Mist formation. Go out into formation, 3 to the east and 4 to the west, 5 to the north and 1 to the west. Enter the formation, south 3, east 6, west 4, north 9. There was no pattern in the 4 directions. Although Zuyun was literate, he was still dizzy. When I reached the end of the page, I saw only a few lines written on the paper. The fog formation traps people in the fog. If you make one wrong step, you will make mistakes every step of the way. If you don't have the strength to break through the formation by far, you will be trapped in the fog forever. Zuyun shivered, remembering that Sun Suanhua had asked him to follow closely, otherwise there would be no master-disciple relationship. The implication is that this formation can trap people to death. Zuyun shuddered, and forced himself to read it again, but he could only remember the first sentence of East 3, West 4. What can I do? I can't remember it for half an hour. While he was in distress, Zuyun suddenly had an idea flash in his mind. Don't I have a baby? There is plenty of time in the Diwu glass mirror. Thinking of this, Zuyun didn't hesitate at all, and appeared in the mirror space with a thought. After sitting on the stone bench, he concentrated on reading aloud. Although he had little effect, it could not stop him from reading all night long. Zuyun had a rough idea of the difference between the time in the mirror and the time in the outside world. On one of the nights, the time in the outside world was only about an hour or two. After reading for an unknown amount of time, Zuyun felt sleepy and yawned profusely. But thinking that it would be a waste of time, he gritted his teeth and took out a thin needle from the package. After 5 needle holes were inserted into his thigh, Zuyun finally remembered them all, yawning one after another, with snot and tears flowing from his mouth. He took a strong breath, left the fragmented space, and fell asleep regardless of the wet and cold grass. After a while, he began to snore softly. After a while, Sun Suanhua walked out of the fog and saw Zuyun, who was sleeping. He stepped forward and cursed, "Good boy, you still say that you are obedient. How long have I been gone? You are drooling in your sleep." However, Zuyun remained motionless. Sun Suanhua was furious. He flicked his sleeves and robe, and a yellow talisman appeared in his hand, and then he threw it on Zuyun's head. The talisman paper directly turned into fire, and Zuyun's short black hair burned up in the blink of an eye. Zuyun felt the pain and sat up from the ground, but he couldn't help but look sleepy. Although his eyes were sleepy, he recognized that the person in front of him was Sun Suanhua. "Master, master, disciple, disciple will memorize it." While speaking, Zuyun lowered his head and let out a long snore. Sun Suanhua's face was gloomy and he said in a deep voice, "Now that you can recite it, you can recite it to me. If there is a typo, don't blame me for throwing you off the mountain. Go out into formation, 3 in the east and 4 in the west, 5 in the north and 1 in the west, 6 in the south and 9 in the north." Strangely enough, Zuyun, who spoke intermittently, could now recite it extremely fluently. Even though he spoke so fast, there was nothing wrong with him. Sun Suanhua's expression gradually solidified, and by the time Zuyun finished reciting it, he was already beyond shocked. "Good boy, I carried it for a day and a night, now you can do it after sleeping. You are really a humming talent." After returning to his senses, he looked towards Zuyun and saw him lying on the grass with glistening saliva hanging from the corner of his mouth. Sun Suanhua's anger had long since dissipated, and now he looked at Zuyun to his liking. "I thought I would be a janitor, but I didn't expect to find a treasure. With this kind of memory, I have learned something that no one wants to learn. It seems, but this kid is only 10 years old. It's a lot of fun, but you still need to temper your temper." After that, he picked up Zuyun and walked towards the house. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 4. The next day, Zuyun woke up slowly, and all his fatigue disappeared. He stretched and sat up, and then he found himself on a wooden bed. But he always felt that his head was a little empty, so he couldn't help but reach out to touch it. His face suddenly changed and he screamed, "Where is my hair?" Ahem. Not far from the bed, 2 dry laughs came. Zuyun looked up and quickly rolled off the bed. "Disciple greets master." Sun Suanhua was embarrassed, but still said with a straight face, "No need to be polite." "Thank you, master." Although Zuyun stood up, he didn't dare to look up. He still remembered that when he talked about the 5 spiritual roots yesterday, Sun Suanhua's face was not good. "You should have heard that the master has not accepted a disciple for 100 years. The master has a lot of things to do next. You should learn to take care of the chores in the valley in the next few days." Sun Suanhua said lightly, telling him what he needed to do. After he finished talking, Zuyun didn't hear anything about cultivation, so he asked in a low voice, "Master, what about cultivation?" "Cultivation? What's so good about cultivating 5 spiritual roots? You really don't know what's good for you." Sun Suanhua had never planned to teach Zuyun to cultivate. What can 5 spiritual roots cultivate? He was usually too busy with his own affairs. Otherwise, in the past 100 years, he could just find a kid who would be no worse than 5 spiritual roots, right? Zuyun lowered his head, but he was more and more unwilling in his heart. Following Zhang Tianyuan to Lingjian sect, isn't it to cultivate immortality? But the master who worships me won't teach me, what should I do? Is my treasure still useful if I keep it with me? Seeing Zuyun's low mood, Sun Suanhua couldn't help but feel a little sorry for him, so he comforted him tactfully, "Little kid, you are new here, if you really want to cultivate, don't rush. Your master will take you to get familiar with this valley first, and it's not too late to cultivate when you have free time on weekdays." Zuyun finally felt better after hearing this. Then he followed Sun Suanhua around the valley. Sun Suanhua introduced the function of each room and walked to a 3-story building. "Little kid, this is my teacher's library, which contains 3,000 books. It has been said since ancient times that books contain golden houses and beautiful women. If you have nothing to do, you can come here more often. In addition, my teacher has 7 skills. You can also take some basic books on drawing talismans, refining pills, and refining tools." Sun Suanhua thought that Zuyun had a good memory and it would be a waste if he didn't read books. Of course, after successful cultivation, memory will gradually improve. But he didn't think about teaching Zuyun to cultivate at all. "Yes, master." When Zuyun heard that there were 3,000 books here, his eyes lit up. His father told him since he was a child that it didn't matter whether he read books or not, but he must know the words. If he picked up a treasure, he would know what it was. So he was very serious about learning to recognize words at that time. Sun Suanhua introduced the remaining rooms one by one, then said he had something to do and left the valley in a hurry. Zuyun thought for a moment and went back to the library. When he pushed the door open, a scent of ink and dust hit his nose. He saw a row of bookshelves that were taller than Zuyun, and the books on the shelves were dazzling. Although Sun Suanhua said that he had 3,000 books, he was shocked when he saw them. There was an old wooden table at the door, and a rag was hung on the corner of the table. Zuyun thought, since he was here, he might as well dust it. Zuyun took the rag and wiped the dust while seeing the title of each book. When he came across an interesting title, he simply took it out and put it aside, ready to read it before going to bed. About an hour later, Zuyun cleaned the 3-story building, and he also held several books in his hands. Back to the room arranged by Sun Suanhua for him, Zuyun picked up a book and opened the first page. Fighting Continent. Fighting Power, 3 stages, what the hell, is this a storybook? He put the book aside and took the second one. Yunzhou Chronicles. Yunzhou is vast, covering 3,000 miles. It is said that thousands of years ago, this place was the site of a great war between the righteous and the evil. After more than 100 years of war, the earth veins were broken, and the spiritual power was exhausted. It is now a barren place for cultivating immortals. Zuyun flipped it open and read the first sentence. He felt uncomfortable and simply threw it aside. 5 Elements Chaos Sutra? The world has spirits, and people have 5 elements. They are nurtured in different times to create all things. The 5 elements gather together, and the great way is like nothing. Gold is from profit, wood is from life, earth is from thickness, water is from moisture, and fire is from flame. On the first page, with only a few sentences, Zuyun seemed to have some insights in his heart. He himself has 5 spiritual roots, and he chose this book because of the 2 words 5 elements. When he turned to the second page, his pupils shrank suddenly. People often say that the 5 spiritual roots are mixed spiritual roots. Of course, there are 5 elements in the sky, 5 elements in the earth, and 5 elements in people. The 5 elements are mutually generated and restrained, and complement each other. Cultivating immortals is against the will of heaven, but the 5 spiritual roots are in line with the way of heaven. If you absorb the 5 kinds of spiritual power separately and store them in the danshan, forming a balanced trend and then feeding back to the 5 elements of spiritual roots, you can seize the fortune of heaven and earth and break the sun, moon, and stars. Seeing this, Zhu Yun's breathing has become rapid. He remembered that on the way to Lingjian sect, Zhang Tianyuan once said that he had 4 spiritual roots, and he needed 4 times the spiritual power of a single spiritual root when practicing. But the words did not mention the attributes of spiritual power. He has been cultivating immortals for decades, but he is only the 6th level of chi refining. If the 5 spiritual roots were to be cultivated like him, not only would it require a massive amount of spiritual power, but the strongest one would be in the 6th level of chi refining. And according to what is said in the 5 elements of Chaos Sutra, if the spiritual power of the 5 attributes is absorbed to nourish the spiritual roots, wouldn't it be? Can we break through the shackles? How to distinguish spiritual attributes? Thinking of this, Zhu Yun quickly turned the book to the 3rd page, only to find that this page was empty. Zhu Yun was amazed, and it was still the same after turning another page. Even when I turned to the end, it was all empty. It's really weird. It looks like it has some flavor, why is it gone? Monk Zhang Er was confused and put the book aside, planning to wait until Sun Suanhua came back to ask him for advice. I picked up a book called Year Identification of Miraculous Medicines, which contains various information on how to distinguish the year of medicines, but the few sentences from the 5 elements of Chaos Sutra kept coming back and forth in my mind, and I couldn't understand it at all. I read several books on weapon refining and alchemy one after another, and it was the same situation. Just when Zhu Yun was planning to read the 5 elements of Chaos Sutra again, Sun Suanhua came back. Seeing a thick stack of books placed in front of Zhu Yun, he nodded with satisfaction. I thought that when I left the valley, this kid would definitely play around in the valley, but I didn't expect that he would actually be reading a book seriously. This does not require training. He took out a few books from the middle and said, "Little boy, if you want to learn how to be a teacher, you should read this elementary talisman encyclopedia first." Only then did Zhu Yun come back to his senses and found that Sun Suanhua was right in front of him. He couldn't help being shocked. "I've seen Master." "It doesn't matter." Sun Suanhua waved his hand and motioned Zhu Yun to sit down. He glanced aside and frowned. "Little kid, what are you doing with this wordless heavenly book?" "Wordless heavenly book?" Zhu Yun was stunned and confused. Sun Suanhua was so angry and funny that he picked up the 5 elements of Chaos Sutra and said, "There is not a single word in this shabby book. I spent a month as a teacher, but not even a single word appeared on it. If it weren't for the fact that it can't be damaged by water or fire, even it has been left in the alchemy furnace for 77 and 49 days without any change, so I should have thrown it away long ago." Hearing this, Zhu Yun opened his mouth in surprise. What he wanted to say reached his lips and was quickly swallowed back into his stomach. He looked thoughtfully at the 5 characters, 5 elements of Chaos Sutra on the cover, with dragons and phoenixes dancing. "You kid, do you think this is just a blank piece of paper, and you use it to write and draw? Okay, as long as you like it, I'll give it to you as a teacher. Anyway, stay here with me. If you look angry, it's too hard to wipe your butt." Sun Suanhua couldn't help but smile when he saw Zhu Yun seemed a little nervous. Then, he took out a porcelain bottle stopper from his arms and gave it to Zhu Yun. "This shabby book is not a good thing. I only have this bottle of spirit-supporting pill with me. I'll give it to you as a greeting gift. Take one when you have nothing to do. It can temporarily increase the spiritual power in the body." After that, Sun Suanhua hummed a little tune and left the room. It wasn't until he walked far away that Zhu Yun came to his senses. The wordless heavenly book is not wordless, but Sun Suanhua cannot see it. "But why can I see it?" When Zhu Yun was confused, his stomach suddenly growled. Then I remembered that I had not eaten a grain of rice since I got to the valley, so I was hungry. By the way, is this spirit-supporting pill made from spirit-supporting fruit? Since master gave it to me, it means I can eat it? Zuyun was embarrassed to ask Sun Suanhua for food, so he poured out a pill and swallowed it in his mouth. A familiar feeling arose spontaneously, and at the same time, my whole body was filled with strength, which was no different from eating fulinguo. He opened the 5 Elements of Chaos Sutra without hesitation, and without thinking, he flipped through a few more pages, reaching the 3rd page. However, the 3rd page, which was originally empty, now contained the same font as the previous 2 pages. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 5. Zuyun breathed quickly, suppressing the excitement in his heart, and read on line by line. The 5 Elements of Chaos Sutra is a mysterious technique written by this immortal. It is designed to allow all mortals with 5 spiritual roots to embark on the path to immortality. Only those with 5 spiritual roots can read the text on 1 or 2 pages of this technique. Of course, if you want to read the 3rd and 4th pages, you must have spiritual power. For the chi refining period, please look at pages 5 and 6. Foundation building period, page 7 or 8. Energy formation period, page 9 or 10. Nascent soul stage, page 11. God transformation stage, page 12. Void refining period, page 13. Combined period, page 14. Mahayana period, page 15. The period of transcending tribulation, page 16. At one glance, Zuyun was trembling all over. This 5 Elements of Chaos Sutra is indeed mysterious. No wonder I only saw 2 pages. It turns out that I have no spiritual power. And after he swallowed the spirit-supporting pill, he had spiritual power in his body for a short time, and he could see the 3rd page. By the way, doesn't it mean that you can also read the 4th page? Zuyun quickly turned to the next page, his face instantly filled with surprise. The 5 Elements of Chaos Sutra is called a mysterious skill. In addition to using a secret method to write the text so that only the 5 spiritual roots can see it, its cultivation method is also very different from all other skills. Cultivation methods are all about balance. The 5 elements are mutually reinforcing and interfering, complementing and lacking each other. If they are separated into 5 positions within the danshan, they can be as solid as a rock and indestructible. In the early stage of cultivation, the sea of qi needs to be divided into 5 parts. After absorbing the spiritual energy and refining it, the practitioner needs to distinguish between gold, wood, earth, water, and fire. If there is a slight difference, the sea of qi will have the power to self-destruct. Be careful, be careful. However, when the cultivation is complete, the 5 spiritual powers can be integrated into one, which I call the power of chaos. This is the origin of the name of the 5 Elements Chaos Sutra. The following is the method of swallowing spiritual energy in this book. The 5 elements of human beings correspond to the 5 hearts. Concentrate and calm your breath, open and close with one breath. Zuyun read it word by word, and his mood slowly calmed down. And he couldn't help but follow the requirements in the scriptures and assume a posture with 5 hearts pointing upward. According to the training requirements in the 5 Elements of Chaos Sutra, he began to breathe in the air, filter, and transform the first trace of spiritual power. Zuyun concentrated on controlling this spiritual power and slowly swam towards the danshan. As soon as he entered the danshan, Zuyun was shocked. It turns out that the spiritual power after taking the Fuling pill still exists in the Qi sea. At this time, there were slight ripples like the sea surface, but after this spiritual power came in, the wind suddenly surged. Zuyun was shocked, his eyes couldn't help but open, and he suddenly lost control of this spiritual power, and it immediately dissipated. Little kid, why did you make such a big fuss when you took the Ling pill? At this time, the door of the room was suddenly pushed open, and Sun Suanhua walked in with a jade plaque in his hand, feeling a scattered spiritual power. However, he did not expect that Zuyun was practicing, and thought it was because he had taken the Fulling pill. Zuyun hurriedly said, "Master, this is the first time my disciple has taken the spirit-supporting pill. With the spiritual power in his body, he can't help but throw a few punches." "Okay, okay," Sun Suanhua waved his hand and said, "there are plenty of spirit-supporting pills here, so there's no need to make a fuss. Here, this brand is for you, don't lose it." Zuyun took the sign and felt a little heavy. He didn't know what kind of material it was made of, and it felt extremely cold. Sun Suanhua smiled and said, "Little boy, this is your identity plate in the Lingjian sect in the future. Take this plate to register in the Great Harmony Hall, and you will be a disciple of the Lingjian sect from now on. You need to make elixirs as a teacher, and you remember to go out. The only way is to do it yourself." When he heard that he could come out of the valley, Zuyun was very happy and said, "Thank you, Master." Just when he was about to prostrate himself, he felt an unknown force holding him up. "My teacher is different from those old immortals. I don't like to kneel down. You should learn your skills as a teacher and don't delay your business because of your cultivation." Zuyun sighed in his heart, knowing that Sun Suanhua was still not optimistic about his cultivation, so he had no choice but to agree, thinking that when he mastered the cultivation, he would definitely surprise his master. When Sun Suanhua saw this, he nodded frequently, secretly thinking that this boy is quite sensible. Holding the identity plate in his arms, Zuyun carefully walked out of the fog formation. There was only a mountain road from the valley to the sect, so he would not go wrong. Following his memory, Zuyun first found the mountain gate. "I've met senior brother Li Chang." After seeing Qin Liken, Zuyun quickly saluted. "Hey, is it you, fifth junior brother?" Qin Liken turned around and was slightly startled when he saw it was Zuyun. Where did this fifth junior brother come from? Seeing Zuyun's confused look, Qin Liken smiled and explained, "Among the disciples of the sect, you are the only one with 5 spiritual roots. You are also the disciple of the 7th uncle, so it is more appropriate to call you 5th junior brother." Zuyun was stunned, but he smiled bitterly in his heart. These 5 spiritual roots were really unpopular. "By the way, 5th junior brother, where are you going?" Qin Liken didn't notice this, but even if he did, he didn't take it to heart. It's just that he was known for his good temper, so he was specially responsible for receiving new disciples here. "Senior brother Liken, Master gave me a sign saying that I need to go to the Dehi Hall to register, but I don't know how to get there." "Dehi Hall, just keep walking along this road." Qin Liken pointed in a direction. "By the way, senior brother Liken, junior brother has one more request." Zuyun remembered the direction and asked again. "You want to ask the companions who came with you?" Qin Liken put away his smile and said, "Fifth junior brother, you don't know what happened here yesterday. One of them has 2 spiritual roots, and the other has 3 spiritual roots. He is a good young man in cultivation, and the elders and uncles fought for several hours to determine the winner." Hearing this, Zuyun couldn't help but feel envious. He knew that only outstanding people would be scrambled for. Although Qin Liken didn't say it clearly, Zuyun understood the meaning. "But now I have the 5 elements of Chaos Sutra, which is very suitable for my practice. And there is also a Dewu glass mirror. I can definitely catch up with them. However, if you want to meet them, just practice hard. Our sex competition will be held on the first day of next month. If you can enter the chi refining period before then, you can participate, and you will definitely be able to meet them then." Qin Liken's words made Zuyun feel happy. "I thought that you have to practice to a certain level before you can see it. Didn't you expect that there would be such a thing as a sect competition? This is just the first state of the chi refining stage, it should be fine, right?" Thinking of this, Zuyun couldn't wait to thank Qin Liken and ran towards the Great Harmony Hall. At this time, he just wanted to get things done quickly and then go back to the valley to practice. Until Zuyun left, a figure wandered out from the rockery not far away. Lycan, why did you say those words to him? Zhang Tianyuan took the wine gourd, took a sip and said. The implication is that Zuyun has 5 spiritual roots. How can he reach the qi refining stage in less than a month? It's simply a fantasy. Qin Lycan was slightly startled and said, Senior brother Zhang, isn't this your illegitimate son who is living outside the country? Otherwise, you would bring the 5 spiritual roots to the sect. Zhang Tianyuan said in disbelief, what did you say? I'll give you a chance to say it again. Qin Lycan was immediately dumbfounded, knowing that he had misunderstood what Zhang Tianyuan meant at that time, and couldn't help but shut up quickly. You kid, no wonder I told you that you said you would be your apprentice to the 7th master. It turns out you were wrong. I, Zhang Tianyuan, can only drink and not be lewd. How could I have an illegitimate child? My reputation has been ruined by you. Qin Lycan knew he was in the wrong, so he shrank his neck and said, Senior brother Zhang, it's too late to say this now. Humph. Zhang Tianyuan spread his hand in front of Qin Lycan and said, give me a Heki pill, and I won't argue with you. Senior brother Zhang, what do you want the Heki pill for? Qin Lycan was a little reluctant to give up, but he also knew that he had said the wrong thing first. It's all your fault and my negligence that made that baby suffer. I'll go outside to find something good for that baby. I have a Heki pill with me just in case. Senior brother Zhang, this is the only one I have. As soon as Qin Lycan took out a porcelain vase from his arms, Zhang Tianyuan snatched it away. It's good if you have one. I don't have one. I would have exchanged it for wine. After that, he walked down the mountain road and left. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 6. Zuyun walked all the way to the Hall of Harmony. An old man, who did not know what state he was in, took his identity plate and looked at it several times, then looked Zuyun up and down, and finally gave him an ordinary small sword and his name. It is the technique of sword control. The old man raised his eyelids slightly. Baby, from what I see, you'd better be a handyman. Senior, why should you be a handyman if you can cultivate immortality? Zuyun was very puzzled. You should call me Elder Mu. The old man opened his cloudy eyes and asked again, this identity plate records that you have 5 spiritual roots, right? Yes, Elder Mu. When Zuyun heard that the old man actually held the position of elder, he couldn't help but become respectful. But he felt a little dissatisfied when Elder Mu persuaded him to become a handyman. We, the Spirit Sword sect, do not accept waste. Your cultivation of the 5 spiritual roots consumes a lot more resources than others. Do you understand what this means? Upon hearing this, Zuyun's little face turned red, and he clenched his fists without realizing it. Forget it, Elder Mu suddenly waved his hand, meaning that Zuyun could leave. You are Sun Suanhua's disciple, he can be self-sufficient, get out of here. Although Zuyun was unwilling to accept it, he was also self-aware and only wanted to succeed in cultivation so that everyone would be impressed. Jogging all the way back to the valley, I happened to meet Sun Suanhua. Disciple, you are quite fast in getting things. Sun Suanhua looked unkind. He felt that no matter how active Zuyun was about cultivation, it would be a waste of time. Zuyun subconsciously held the 2 things in his arms and whispered, Master, this disciple just wants to. What are you thinking about? Sun Suanhua reached out and grabbed the small sword in his hand. He broke the sword into 2 pieces and threw it into the ditch. Water splashed all over Zuyun. Take this broken sword out to shame me, Sun Suanhua. Zuyun was anxious. Master, if this sword is gone, what will I use to practice? He was only thinking about the competition during the chi refining period. The 5 elements of Chaos Sutra did not teach any techniques. Zuyun was still counting on this sword. As a result, the sword hilt was gone before it was even warm. You want a sword, but I have many low-grade magic weapons here. But I have told you time and time again, don't delay your business for the sake of cultivation. Of the 7 abilities of the master, which one is not better than cultivation? Sun Suanhua said angrily. He thought that Zuyun had such a good memory and wanted to cultivate it carefully, but who knew that he didn't know what to do? But master, I want to participate in the sect competition. Zuyun wanted to know the current situation of his 3 companions so that he could feel at ease, so he said a little stubbornly. Sect fight? Little kid, where did you get the courage? Sun Suanhua laughed angrily and said, you can participate in the competition during the chi refining period. But do you know how your 5 spiritual roots can reach the chi refining period within a month? Master, I can definitely do it. Elder Mu's indifferent and disgusting expression suddenly appeared in Zuyun's mind, and he simply puffed up his chest. A perseverance came out of his thin body. Is it possible? Sun Suanhua's face suddenly turned cold. Knowing that this boy would not shed tears without seeing the coffin, he said, you think it is possible, right? Well, do you dare to make a bet with me? If you can do it before the competition, once you reach the chi refining stage, my teacher will support you and will never hinder your cultivation in the future. Having said this, Sun Suanhua paused for a moment before continuing, if you can't do it, you will give up the idea of practicing from now on, obey my master's arrangements, and inherit my master's mantle. Zuyun immediately agreed and said seriously, Master, as a role model for others, you must not go back on your word. Good boy, do you still dare to teach me a lesson? Sun Suanhua said disdainfully, don't worry, my teacher will not lie to you, a young boy. Although he said this, Sun Suanhua still took out a small golden sword from his arms and threw it over, saying, this is the first magic weapon that my master refined 100 years ago, so I will give it to you as compensation. But I don't know how to use a sword as a teacher, so you should learn how to control the sword by yourself. With that said, he turned and left. But after taking only 2 steps, he stopped again and said, my master is about to go on a far journey and will come back before the sect competition begins. If you are hungry, go to the alchemy room to get Bigo pills to eat, and the rest of the pills medicines, except Fuling Dan, cannot be taken randomly, remember. Hearing this, Zuyun couldn't help but feel a little moved. This master was hard-spoken and soft-hearted. If he hadn't had the 5 elements of Chaos Sutra, he might have followed his wishes. Thank you, master. After seeing Sun Suanhua leave with his own eyes, Zuyun returned to the house. He first took out the sword control technique and read through it. Every move and sword taught above required spiritual power as a basis, so he simply threw it aside. He looked at the golden sword again and found that it was indeed countless times better than the sect's standard sword. He was secretly grateful to Sun Suanhua in his heart. Then with a thought, he entered the space inside the mirror. There is only this small cave in the day-glazed mirror, and there is no exit. The surroundings are extremely quiet. Zuyun sat cross-legged on the bed and started practicing. At this time, the spiritual power of the spirit-supporting pill in the Danshan had long since dispersed. Zuyun controlled the first trace of refined spiritual power and carefully poured it into the Danshan. The sea of qi is empty, and this trace of spiritual power enters, as if there is none. However, there was no change in the air sea, which made Zuyun relieved. He secretly thought that it must be due to the different spiritual attributes before. The 5 elements of Chaos Sutra said that spiritual power should be divided into 5 types, but now there is only a trace of spiritual power in total. Zuyun couldn't separate it, so he planned to let the Sea of Qi divide to a certain extent before testing. I don't know how long it took, but there was a thin layer of spiritual power in the Sea of Qi. Zhu Yun stopped practicing and focused all his attention on the Sea of Qi. The perspective at this time was from top to bottom. The seemingly calm Sea of Qi, but Zhu Yun felt an undercurrent surging. From time to time there will be crackling sounds. However, this is still within his tolerance range, and it is also due to the fact that the Qi Hai is not large. Looking carefully, he found that these spiritual powers had 5 completely different reactions. The one who is invincible must be the metal spiritual power. What slowly circulates with some vitality is the wood element. Steady as a mountain, motionless is the earth element. The gentle and gentle thing is the water system. The irritable and frantic ones are the fire element. This must be the gold, wood, earth, water, and fire mentioned before. Zhu Yun was overjoyed and immediately understood how to distinguish the attributes of the 5 spiritual powers. Separate the gold spiritual power first and take a look. Zhu Yun did as he said, carefully controlling the spiritual power except for the metal element, and turned to the remaining positions. After all the golden spiritual power in the entire Qi Sea returned here, a golden light suddenly flashed out and then disappeared into it. The originally rampant metal spiritual power suddenly calmed down. I understand. Zhu Yun was shocked. At first, when the Qi Sea was not divided, the 5 spiritual powers were mixed. No, it should be said that they were mixed together. They are constantly intertwined and collided, and there is a feeling of undercurrent. And in this area, there is only metal spiritual power, and those with the same attributes are naturally in line with the way of heaven and are extremely stable. This also corresponds to a balanced word mentioned in the 5 elements of Chaos Sutra. Zhu Yun took a deep breath and continued to control the wood spiritual power, followed by the water, fire, and earth elements. After all the spiritual energy was completely separated and placed, the entire Sea of Qi suddenly began to vibrate. The 5 divided positions emitted 5 light beams of gold, green, yellow, blue and red respectively. The beam of light soared into the sky, and after breaking through the Danshan, it quickly merged into one, turning into a gray-white beam of light that went straight into Zhu Yun's mind. Boom boom boom. Before Zhu Yun could react, there was a loud sound in his body, which continued continuously, as if a mountain collapsed inside Zhu Yun's body. Zhu Yun was horrified and remembered the 2 precautions mentioned in the 5 elements of Chaos Sutra. Could it be that he had made a mistake and blew himself up? But suddenly, the roar quickly dissipated, and the air sea returned to calm, but the 5 divided positions were slowly flowing in the air sea. It can be seen that the 5 colors of spiritual power belong to each one. Zhu Yun took a closer look and realized that although the spiritual power was rotating, the 5 colors were not mixed together again. It was as if a 5-color turntable was slowly rotating within the entire Qi Sea. What's even more surprising is that the air sea has more than doubled in size. Zhu Yun was stunned. What's going on? But noticing that there was nothing strange about Qi Hai and Danshan, Zhu Yun simply retreated into consciousness and immediately felt sticky and uncomfortable. It stinks. A towering stench irritated Zhu Yun's nasal cavity. He quickly pinched his nose and returned to his room with a thought. As he walked toward the door, he breathed carefully, for fear that he would be poisoned by the stench. As soon as he opened the door, accumulated dust hit his face. Zhu Yun was caught off guard, and a lot of dust fell in his eyes. Then he woke up. How long have I been practicing, and there is dust on the door? But at this time, he smelled bad and his body and skin felt extremely uncomfortable. Zhu Yun couldn't care too much and rushed to the edge of the small ditch. There was no one in the valley, so Zhu Yun took off his clothes, only to realize that he looked as if he had crawled out of a mud pit before. The black mud clings tightly to the body like a form-fitting armor. However, there were some cracks in the black mud at the joints, and Zhu Yun knew that this was caused by his movements. But he couldn't care too much at this time and just lay down in the ditch. The water flow was slow, and the black mud melted when it met the water. It didn't take long before it was completely washed away. Zuyun felt a lot more relaxed, and then he sat up from the ditch. The black mud was washed away, but his skin looked like a new one. He was confused and didn't know that this was related to his cultivation. The spiritual power in his body washed his marrow and cut his menstruation, expelling toxins and impurities from the surface of his body. But he felt so comfortable all over his body that Zuyun was very excited, knowing that he must have succeeded in his cultivation. But he didn't know that the canal was not far downstream. Many small fish were floating on the water with their bellies turned over, and were carried downstream by the current. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 7. Back in the room, the air was filled with a faint stench of mud. Zuyun opened all the windows for ventilation, and then he found that the sun was setting. I have been practicing for so long. He couldn't help but exclaimed. He had heard those brokers say that there is no time for cultivating immortals, but he didn't expect that he had only practiced once, and it took so long. No, it's just that the master is not coming back for the time being, so hurry up and practice in the Dao glass mirror. Zuyun didn't care about resting, and appeared in the space in the mirror with a thought. He took out the 5 Elements Chaos Sutra and soon immersed his mind in it. He already had spiritual power, and he didn't need the spiritual power of the spiritual fruit to see the contents of the 3rd and 4th pages. After creating the 5-color sea of qi in the danshan, Zuyun's practice became relatively simple. But he didn't know that each color of his was equivalent to the size of an ordinary person's danshan. Just refining spiritual power is 5 times slower than others, not to mention the need to distinguish and place these spiritual powers. At this time, Zuyun was more like ignorant and fearless. He only knew that the cultivation of the 5 spiritual roots was more difficult than that of others. As the spiritual power in the sea of qi increased, Zuyun's cultivation speed gradually slowed down. He stopped until he could no longer save a trace of spiritual power. Feeling the surging power in his body, Zuyun was full of joy, but he also knew that he had a long way to go before reaching the qi refining stage. I don't know how much time has passed. Zuyun stood up, stretched his waist and moved his muscles. Suddenly, a green light flashed across the green jade slip on the stone table. Just like when he first saw the jade slip, the green light rushed into his mind without any warning. A series of strange information emerged from his mind. After a moment, he couldn't help but open his mouth wide. When Zuyun was connected to the soul of this mirror at first, he was still immortal and could only temporarily use the spiritual power of the fulling fruit. Even if his essence and blood were bound to this mirror, he only barely knew how to use it. Now, although he has not reached the qi refining stage, he has his own spiritual power. The jade slip took the initiative to reveal more information about the mirror to Zuyun. For example, the time ratio with the outside world is 4:1. 4 days in the mirror, only 1 day in the outside world. But as Zuyun's realm improves, the difference in the flow rate of time will become larger and larger. If he breaks through to the qi refining stage, the time difference can be changed to 5:1. In addition, Zuyun also knows that the fragments of the Dao glass mirror can be sensed if they are within a certain range. So that's it? Zuyun was full of joy. Cultivation was what he had to do, and the qi refining stage was also the nearest goal. But he overlooked that he could sense other fragments. If this fragment was on someone else, would he be discovered? After knowing the time difference, Zuyun felt a little more relaxed. He was afraid that he would keep practicing in it and forget the time. After thinking about it, he felt that he still needed something to time it, and there were some thick incense sticks in Sun Suanhua's utility room. It would take exactly 12 hours to burn one. Thinking of this, Zuyun left the Dao glass mirror. On the way to the utility room, he had to pass the alchemy room. When he returned to the house, he was holding dozens of incense sticks in his hands, and at the same time, he stuffed a bottle of qigong pills in his arms. After preparing, Zuyun entered the space in the mirror, first swallowed a qigong pill, and then lit the incense sticks. He was ready for long-term practice. Day after day. Sitting on the ground, Zuyun was absorbing and refining spiritual power all the time. According to the 5 Elements Chaos Sutra, to break through to the Qi refining stage, it is necessary to constantly use spiritual power to impact the Qi barrier. As long as this barrier is broken, the Qi refining stage will be a natural result. It's like a lake, constantly filling it with water. But the lake always has a way to drain water by itself, so no matter how you fill it, it is difficult to break through the lake embankment. He could only keep pouring water, relying on this weak force, and accumulate it over and over again until the lake embankment could no longer bear it. This was what happened to Zuyun at this moment. The Qi was always full, and he kept pouring spiritual power into it, but the Qi kept discharging excess spiritual power. However, Zuyun could feel that his cultivation speed was getting faster and faster, and had faintly exceeded the speed at which the Qi discharged spiritual power. Although it was only a trace, it had given him hope. In addition, the Qi was a relatively closed space, and Zuyun knew the principle of gathering sand to form a tower. The small cave was full of burnt incense ashes on the ground. Zuyun didn't know how many incense sticks he had burned, and it was already the critical period of cultivation. For days, Zuyun maintained a posture, and he almost maintained a posture except for lighting incense. The legs that were crossed had long been numb. But Zuyun knew that he couldn't stop, otherwise all the previous efforts of these days of cultivation would be wasted. He gritted his teeth, with no distractions in his mind, and only one thought that he would not stop until the Qi refining stage. A few days later, Zuyun discovered that there was a sudden change in his Qi. The 5-colored spiritual energy that was originally flowing slowly began to accelerate slowly, making a rumbling sound. He had heard about the wild sea area, where the huge sea monsters could stir up dozens of waves by turning and moving, but compared with the Qi at this time, it was just like that. Zuyun suppressed his excitement and did not stop practicing. Instead, the speed was steadily increasing, and the rhythm of absorbing and refining spiritual energy was slowly accelerated. The rumbling sound continued, and the 5-color Qi had already been raging, constantly hitting the edge of the Qi. Every time it hit, Zuyun could feel the vibration in his lower abdomen, which was the impact of the Danshan by this huge force. He knew that this was the last step mentioned in the 5 Elements Chaos Sutra. As long as he broke through the edge barrier, he would be a cultivator in the Qi refining period, and he would truly embark on the path of immortality. Boom boom boom. Originally, only the 5-color Qi flowed in sequence, but at this time, after a loud bang, Zuyun actually found that the entire Qi was turning. As the speed of rotation became faster and faster, the 5 colors that originally flashed by in sequence for him to watch, actually slowly merged into gray. Zuyun knew that this was because the speed was too fast, but he had no time to think about why this happened. He embraced the Yuan and guarded the One, regardless of the increasingly strong vibration of the Danshan. Until, with another loud bang, all the spiritual power in the Qi rushed up to the sky, like a gray pillar that reached the sky and broke through the air. Crack! With a sound like a broken glass lamp and a feeling of unimpededness coming from the body, the Qi was instantly connected to the Danshan. The gray giant pillar instantly turned into 5-color spiritual power, pouring into the Danshan continuously. At this time, there was no barrier between the Danshan and the Qi. The Danshan is the Qi, and the Qi is the Danshan. Naturally, the spiritual power that can be stored has also multiplied several times. Zuyun suddenly opened his eyes, and the Qi refining stage was completed. He looked down and saw that the 50 incense sticks he brought were not many. In other words, It took him more than 40 days to cultivate to the qi refining stage. If this were placed in the outside world, would he still want to catch up with the sect competition? In addition to sighing, Zuyun sighed in his heart that he was very lucky. If there was no time difference of Daoliyuli mirror, if there was no coincidence to encounter the 5 elements Chaos Sutra. Since I have reached the qi refining stage, then I have won the bet with Master. Next, I will participate in the sect competition. I must surprise De Go and Ergo. When you reach the qi refining stage, you can practice the sword controlling technique. Zuyun remembered that he had left the sword by the bed and did not bring it in. According to the time comparison, Zuyun knew that he still had more than 40 days, no, it should be more than 50 days to practice the sword controlling technique. The time difference in the qi refining stage is 5 to 1. Back in the room, the bedside was already covered with dust, but the golden sword was spotless. Zuyun had already felt a little different from the magic weapon. He did not rush to study, but walked out of the room with the sword. Although the space inside the mirror is good and isolated from the world, Zuyun felt a little uncomfortable in his heart because he had not seen the sun for a long time. The valley was still as quiet as before, and there was no difference except the sound of the slow water flow. After walking around, Zuyun went to get some incense and candles, took some fasting pills and returned to the house, then entered the Dao glass mirror again. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 8. After reaching the qi refining stage, Zuyun finally breathed a sigh of relief. After lighting an incense candle in the cave, he began to read the sword control technique. But something strange is that whenever Zuyun starts practicing swordsmanship, the gold spiritual power in Danshan becomes particularly active. It should be because this golden sword is made of metal, right? Zuyunru thought, but he didn't care too much. The first move of the sword control technique is called outward release of sword energy. It is to drive the spiritual power in the body, condense it into sword energy on the tip of the sword, and then release it to attack the enemy. The higher the realm, the greater the power of the sword energy, and the farther away it can attack. Zuyun practiced repeatedly until all the spiritual power in his body was exhausted, then he sat down and absorbed and refined the spiritual power. For several days in a row, he took Bigu pill when he was hungry, and drank some water from the canal when he was thirsty. When the incense candle burned out, I lit another one. Until 50 days passed. Zuyun released his sword energy with this move, and he was already very good at it. But due to Zuyun's realm, the sword energy didn't shoot very far. As for the power, he practiced his sword against the stone wall of the cave for several days without leaving a single sword mark. Fortunately, Zuyun knew what he was doing and knew that participating in the sect competition was a good thing. As long as I can see my childhood friends. There are 50 days inside the mirror and 10 days outside. Zuyun counted the days. In 3 days, it will be the first day of the new year. Thinking that the master was coming back soon, he returned to the valley with the golden sword. Standing in front of the mist formation, Zuyun suddenly felt like a dream. After practicing for nearly 100 days, he finally gained something. Just at this moment, a voice came from outside the fog formation, interrupting Zuyun's thoughts. "Fifth junior brother, are you here?" The voice was a little urgent, and after it came in, it continued to echo in the valley. Xianxia was the only one who called him fifth junior brother. What was he doing here? Zuyun was stunned for a moment, then dodged into the mist formation. A moment later, he stood in front of Xianxia. "I've met senior brother Li Chang." Zuyun cupped his hands, bowed slightly, and said, "I wonder why senior brother came here for you." Xianxia was a little surprised. In just half a month, Zuyun looked completely different. I saw that his eyes were clear and bright, and there was a slight flow of spiritual power all over his body. Is this, reaching the qi refining stage? The more he looked, the more shocked he became, and he suddenly forgot the reason for coming here. Senior brother. Zuyun was secretly amused. Qin Lycan must have seen that he was successful in cultivation, so he reacted like this. Ah, Qin Lycan quickly came to his senses, took out a storage bag from his arms and stuffed it into Zuyun's hand. At the same time, he said in a serious tone, "Fifth junior brother, this is what senior brother Zhang left for you." Senior brother Zhang? Zhang Tianyuan. Zuyun was surprised. At that time, Zhang Tianyuan took a bottle of wine from his master and then left without paying any attention to him, which made him feel sad for a while. That's right, Qin Lycan sighed and said, "Senior brother Zhang learned that you wanted to participate in the sect competition, but also knew that your 5 spiritual roots were difficult to cultivate, so he went out to hunt for treasures." Zuyun was a little confused. "Senior brother Li Chang, why didn't senior brother Zhang come over in person?" "Fifth junior brother, senior brother Zhang, can't make it through." Qin Lycan said in a trembling voice, "Senior brother Zhang has died." "What?" Zuyun was shocked, with a look of disbelief on his face. Qin Lycan then told everything that happened after Zuyun asked the Great Harmony Hall. It turned out that Zhang Tianyuan knew that he felt sorry for Zuyun, so he went out to hunt for treasures so that Zuyun could have more tricks during the sect competition. It turned out that the journey was going smoothly, but he also met a few casual cultivators at the foot of the mountain who were also looking for treasures, and they immediately hit it off and stayed with them. Zhang Tianyuan did not talk about the treasure hunting process. They had gained something. Today, they returned to the town at the foot of the mountain and planned to go their separate ways. But Zhang Tianyuan was a generous man, and he found the treasure again, so he said he would have a dinner. During the dinner, Zhang Tianyuan naturally wanted to drink to cheer up. However, it was the wine that caused trouble. This wine is a spiritual wine made by Uncle Seventh Master's secret method. Although it is not a good thing, it is still a rare treasure for casual cultivators. Immediately, the few casual cultivators asked Zhang Tianyuan for a drink, and Zhang Tianyuan was a little reluctant to give up. Several casual cultivators just kept doing nothing and had murderous intentions towards Zhang Tianyuan. Zhang Tianyuan was unable to defeat 4 hands with his 2 fists, and he was reluctant to take out the good wine. In the end, the wine was lost and he was seriously injured. When he returned to the sect, his dantian was completely destroyed and his energy was like a gossamer. Qin Lycan saw him anyway, so Zhang Tianyuan handed his storage bag to Qin Lycan and told him to pass it to Zuyun no matter what. Qin Lycan agreed with tears, and Zhang Tianyuan breathed his last. After hastily burying Zhang Tianyuan, Qin Lycan rushed over immediately. "Senior brother Lycan, how could those casual cultivators kill senior brother Zhang for a jug of wine?" Zuyun couldn't believe it, as if he was asking Qin Lycan, or mumbling to himself. Qin Lycan wiped the corners of his eyes and said in a sad tone, "Fifth junior brother, you don't know, the world of immortal cultivation is actually a place where individuals eat people. Ordinary people call us immortal masters, but when we meet powerful people, it is nothing more than mortals in their eyes, so we always want to become stronger. Those casual cultivators have no sect backing, so they can only take things by force. And Uncle Seventh Master's wine is helpful for cultivation, so it will naturally be regarded as a rare spiritual item by them." Zuyun was touched. He has 5 spiritual roots, and it is impossible for him to cultivate immortality with anyone he meets. Without Zhang Tianyuan, how could he be where he is now? And Zhang Tianyuan even lost his life in order to hunt for him treasure. Although it was just a pot of wine, if Zhang Tianyuan ignored him in Xianxia mountain, he will not suffer this disaster. "Senior brother Lycan, do you know the origins of those rogue cultivators? Also, will the sect help senior brother Zhang take revenge?" Zuyun raised his head, his eyes were red and he was choking. "I don't know," Qin Lycan shook his head and said, "Senior brother Zhang died after explaining the matter, In addition, we are just minor Qi practitioners, and the sect does not care whether we live or die. Speaking of this, Xianxia smiled bitterly and said helplessly, if we are talented in cultivation, should we do some sect chores in exchange for cultivation resources? But you said, Big Dog and Ergu and the others. Zuyun didn't understand. He had obviously joined the sect, but why didn't the sect protect him? Not even caring about death? One of them has 2 spiritual roots, and the other has 3 spiritual roots. They have different talents and different treatment. Why do I say that you can't see them anymore? Because they only need to practice. Zuyun understands, to put it bluntly, it is profit. Among the sects, interests are also important. He thought again of Elder Mu's disdainful eyes and what he said about the self-sufficiency here. It turns out that cultivating immortals is no different from ordinary people. No, it should be more cruel than ordinary people. As long as ordinary people work contentedly, they can naturally make a living. But in the world of immortality, if a pot of wine can arouse murderous intentions, even the Lingjian sect will not stand up for the dead Zhang Tianyuan. Thank you, senior brother. Zuyun lost his mood for a while and thanked Xianxia. It's okay. Xianxia didn't say anything, just patted Zuyun on the shoulder, turned and left. Just as he turned around, he ran into Sun Suanhua, who had a dusty face. Lycan, why are you here? Sun Suanhua glanced at him and then saw Zuyun. He was surprised when he noticed that the spiritual power was flowing in him. Uncle 7th, disciple, come here and hand over senior brother Zhang's relics to junior brother Zhu. In front of Sun Suanhua, he did not dare to call him 5th junior brother. Zhang Tianyuan is dead. Sun Suanhua's face showed no other expression except curiosity, which made Zuyun next to him feel a little uncomfortable. Master, senior brother Zhang died because of the wine you gave him. Sun Suanhua suddenly straightened his face and said coldly to Zuyun, why, Zhang Tianyuan himself is not very strong, how can you still blame me? Or, do you think that you can give him a gift after you have reached the Qi refining stage? Zhang Tianyuan takes revenge. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 9. Zuyun lowered his head. Although what Sun Suanhua said was very rude, I have to say that it does make sense. If Zhang Tianyuan was powerful, how could those few casual cultivators dare to steal the wine? Not to mention, Lingjian sect will also stand up for Zhang Tianyuan. The world of immortality is so unkind. Tell me, do you think you can avenge Zhang Tianyuan? Seeing that Zuyun didn't dare to respond, Sun Suanhua shouted again. Disciple wants to, but can't do it. Zuyun knows what he is capable of. No matter how bad Zhang Tianyuan is, he is still in the 6th level of Qi refining. He has just crossed the threshold of Qi refining. Not to mention, I don't even know who killed Zhang Tianyuan. Even if you want to take revenge, you have nowhere to go. For a moment, Zuyun felt powerless. You are self-aware. Sun Suanhua snorted softly and said, I don't know why you have reached the Qi refining stage, but as you practice, the further you advance, the slower your strength will improve. On the contrary, practice makes me perfect with all my methods. Zuyun agrees with this. Originally, his cultivation speed was slow, and it would take several days to fill the entire Qi Si. But now if he wants to improve his level, he needs to hit his Danshan. The spiritual power required is countless times more. On the contrary, the more you practice, the better you become at practicing sword moves. When practicing the sword control technique and releasing the sword energy in the first move, the speed of the move now is completely different from that of the first attempt. However, he stubbornly believed that Zhang Tianyuan's death had a lot to do with him. If he doesn't take revenge, he can't get over this threshold. Okay, let's not talk about it. You have won the bet, but as a teacher, I still say the same thing. If you want to continue practicing, you must do the things you tell me as a teacher every day. If there is a slight mistake, don't blame me for being rude. After saying that, Sun Suanhua turned around and entered the mist formation. Qin Liken then turned back and walked to Zhu Yun, and said cautiously, "Fifth junior brother, seventh junior uncle is angry. Do you still want to participate in the sect competition now?" "I want to participate, but, senior brother Li Chang, can I ask you a favor?" Zhu Yun said with an inexplicable expression. "Are you trying to find the murderer of senior brother Zhang?" Qin Liken didn't know what Zhu Yun was thinking, and he couldn't help being shocked. "Fifth junior brother, no. Those rogue cultivators are so vicious that they even dare to kill senior brother Zhang, which shows that their realm is not weak." He still had something to say. Even the Linky sect was not looked down upon by them. It was obviously difficult to deal with. "Senior brother Liken, they all say that a gentleman's revenge is never too late, let them live a little longer first. As long as senior brother Liken can find out some, junior brother will be strong enough when the time comes, and he can kill them directly." When Zhu Yun said this, his body couldn't stop shaking. He thought that cultivating immortals would be a free and easy life, but Zhang Tianyuan's death and Qin Liken's words had already deeply touched him. The character developed in the barren stone mountain for 10 years suddenly changed during this period. When people are cultivating immortality, they can't help themselves. "Senior brother, I know." Qin Liken saw Zhu Yun's determined look and knew that it was useless to persuade him. He was not even afraid of Sun Suanhua just now, so what was the use of trying to persuade him? "Thank you, senior brother." Zhu Yun cupped his hands and thanked. "If there is any news, senior brother can come here before sunset every day." "You're welcome. In fact, I also want to avenge senior brother Zhang. Unfortunately, my strength is not even as good as senior brother Zhang." Qin Liken said goodbye to Zhu Yun with a wry smile, thinking secretly that he was not even as good as Zhu Yun, a little kid. In the mist, Sun Suanhua looked indifferent, and the conversation just now completely fell into his ears. "This little kid is so stubborn. You still want to avenge Zhang Tianyuan? Humph, I'll kill you if I don't do it." After muttering a few words to himself, Sun Suanhua quickly walked through the fog, fetched a few books from the library, and sat directly into Zhu Yun's room. When Zhu Yun came back, he slapped all 7 books on the table in front of him. "This is the basic introduction to the 7 methods of being a master. I give you 3 days to memorize it. Otherwise, don't blame me for serving the master's sect rules." Zhu Yun glanced at it and saw that the 7 books were about alchemy, weapon refining, talismans, array formation, elixir planting, winemaking and body skills. Although he is new to cultivating immortals, he also knows that body skills are the skills of mortal warriors. How come this has become one of master's methods? Seeing the astonishment on Zhu Yun's face, Sun Suanhua thought that Zhu Yun was shocked by him, and said proudly, "Little boy, as long as you learn 10% of the skills of being a teacher, you can still be a master of the Lingjian section. Not bad." Zhu Yun recovered his thoughts and said, "Master, what I don't understand is that this body technique is not a mortal technique. Why do you still practice it?" Sun Suanhua laughed and said, "You don't know something about this. Although my strength as a teacher is at the lowest level during the entire foundation building period of Lingjian sect, no one has ever been able to touch the corners of my clothes. This is all because of my body." "Law?" Zhu Yun was puzzled and asked, "Master, why is this?" "It's a long story, and it's hard to explain it to me as a teacher. Since you are already in the chi refining stage, you must have also practiced the sword control technique. In this way, you stab me with a sword, and I will just dodge and not fight back. It will allow you to see what it takes to become a master of the Spirit Sword sect. Seeing that Zuyun seemed to be interested in one of his methods, Sun Suanhua was naturally happy to speak out. Master, I have only practiced one move to release my sword energy. How can I hit you? Zuyun shook his head. Don't say that he only knows one move. Even if he learns it all, the gap in realm is still an insurmountable gap. It doesn't matter. Sun Suanhua waved his hand and said, since I have shown you the merits of the mortal human body, I will not use my realm to bully you. Hurry up and take the small sword that I gave you, let's go to the yard and give it a try. I promise not to use spiritual power. Zuyun looked troubled, but he didn't want to dampen Sun Suanhua's interest, so he followed him to the open space in the courtyard. Don't you want to participate in the sect competition? There are exactly 3 days left. If you learn a little bit of this movement, you can get beaten less. Sun Suanhua seduces Zuyun. Zuyun wanted to say that he just wanted to meet his playmates and didn't want to participate. But there is no point in saying this. Master, I definitely can't stab you. Zuyun thought and shook his head. With this time, he might as well read more books. When Sun Suanhua heard this, he said, how can this work? I'm ready. If you don't stab me, how can I show the power of my movement? With a roll of his eyes, Sun Suanhua said, in this case, you do your best, let alone pierce my master's clothes. Even if you touch my master, I will teach you some ways to deal with the sect competition in these 3 days. You know, this competition is also divided into rankings. The higher the ranking, the greater the reward. Upon hearing this, Zuyun couldn't help but his eyes lit up. The master doesn't want him to practice. Even if the resources in the valley can be self-sufficient, it would be extremely difficult for him to use some of them. But if I took the sect's reward myself, master would be embarrassed to take it away, right? Then master, if you keep your word, I will start. Zuyun put on a posture. Of course. When has my master ever lied to you? Sun Suanhua snorted and said, I would never lie to you even if I lied to heaven and earth. If you are not allowed to practice, do you think you can still get the sword control technique? After saying that, he casually threw off his sleeves and robe, put his hands behind his back, and said calmly, come on, stab me with your sword with all your strength, and let me see what your 5 spiritual roots are in this chi refining stage. What's great? Master, I'm here. Zuyun gave a low shout, drained all the golden spiritual power in his body, and rushed towards the golden sword. But in the blink of an eye, sword energy surged from the tip of the sword. Let the sword energy out. Zuyun stood up and thrust his sword. He didn't know how many times he had practiced this move. Tens of thousands. He didn't count. All he knew was that at this moment, the sword seemed to be part of his body. But in the blink of an eye, a sword energy more than 10 feet wide shot out from the golden sword and went straight towards Sun Suanhua. Sun Suanhua, on the other hand, was dumbfounded. Although he had never practiced sword control techniques, he also knew that the first move of sword energy was no wider than the blade of the sword at most. Boy, are you learning the sword control technique? He cursed loudly, not caring about his master's face, and quickly fell to the ground. It doesn't matter what kind of body method or not. Because the sword energy covered all his escape routes. There is only a slight gap near the ground. Boom. As soon as Sun Suanhua lay down, he took out a talisman and threw it out. There was a shocking loud noise, the earth trembled, echoes continued in the valley, and water waves splashed more than 10 feet in the small canal. Sun Suanhua was also engulfed by this golden light. Zuyun was also shocked. This was the first time he used all the metal spiritual power. He never thought it would have such an effect. Isn't it that even the stone wall in the Daewoo glass mirror cannot leave a scratch? Suddenly, he was a little confused and couldn't hear Sun Suanhua's screams in the golden light at all. I started my cultivation by picking up the immortal skills. Author, Banzuan Xianxia. Chapter 10. When the dust and smoke cleared, Zuyun saw the embarrassed Sun Suanhua. I saw that his clothes were in tatters and his face was covered with dust. He looked like a charcoal seller. Remembering what Sun Suanhua said before, if you touch a corner of his clothes, you will win, Zuyun couldn't help laughing. Good boy. How dare you trick me? Sun Suanhua was furious, raised his hand and cursed, but he couldn't let it go. Master, I didn't know the sword move could be so powerful. Zuyun quickly retracted his smile and said hastily. Nonsense, how can a teacher not know this? While Sun Suanhua was talking, he was blowing smoke from his mouth. Zuyun wanted to laugh but didn't dare. It was very hard to hold it in. It's mysterious to say that you, little kid, obviously have 5 spiritual roots. It has only been more than 20 days, and it is the chi refining period, and you have used the sword control technique to such great power. Could it be that you are here? Are you gifted with a sword? After thinking about it, Sun Suanhua couldn't think of a reason. He simply waved his hand and said, that's all, little kid, you better not practice sword practice in the future. Why? Zuyun was surprised. There is no reason. You can practice anything with swords, guns, and sticks, but you are not allowed to practice swords. Sun Suanhua's face suddenly tightened, he stood up and took back the golden sword. If you look closely, there are already cracks on it. He couldn't help but take a breath. An ordinary sword technique can actually destroy a low-grade magic weapon? It seems like this kid really can't practice swordsmanship. Then master, if I don't practice swordsmanship, how can I participate in sect competitions? Zuyun didn't care if he could practice swordsmanship, and he didn't care about Wanjian Mountain. I just focus on the resource rewards. There are 7 ways to be a master, and the only attack method is the talisman. Seeing that Zuyun was only participating in the competition, Sun Suanhua couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and said. Then, he suddenly stretched out his right hand, with a yellow talisman between his 2 fingers. Zuyun suddenly remembered that when the sword energy was about to hit the master, he also threw a talisman. But is this thing useful? Why don't you still get smashed into disgrace? What's that look in your kid's face? When Sun Suanhua saw Zuyun's expression, he knew what he was thinking, and said, I am careless as a teacher. Remember, in the future, whether it is a competition or a real life and death struggle, don't underestimate anyone. Yes, master. They all regarded themselves as negative examples, Zuyun quickly said seriously. Back to the topic, Sun Suanhua was very satisfied with Zuyun's attitude, nodded, and said, Master just used a defensive talisman. If not, I'm afraid I would have been injured. Disciple understands. Fulu, you can actually understand it as casting spells in another way. As long as you draw runes on the talisman paper and fill it with spiritual power, you can use it anytime and anywhere. Fulu and spells have their own advantages and disadvantages. Fulu, the advantage is that it can be used even if the spiritual power is exhausted, but it is a bit complicated to draw. However, as long as it is drawn well, it is equivalent to an additional method. As he spoke, Sun Suanhua took out a dozen talismans from his arms. Zuyun saw that each one was different, and he could also feel that the talismans contained spiritual power. Look, this is the Firebird talisman. I want you to see how powerful this talisman is. After saying that, Sun Suanhua took out one of the cards and threw it out. In an instant, the talisman ignited a fire, and the fire continued to grow. In the blink of an eye, a firebird turned into a firebird and crashed into the mist. Then there was a bang, and the ground shook, and Zuyun almost fell to the ground. Master, is this talisman so powerful? Zhu Yun's eyes were full of shock. Before this, he only knew the fireball talisman. At that time, Sun Suanhua used the talisman to burn his hair, and he felt that the talisman was nothing more than that. Ha ha ha, of course. This Firebird talisman is an intermediate talisman, and when used, it can be compared to a full-strength strike during the foundation building stage. If you want to learn, my teacher can naturally teach you. Master, can my disciple learn now? Sun Suanhua shook his head and said, of course not now. You haven't learned to crawl yet, and you want to learn to fly. If you want to learn, start from the elementary level first. Didn't my teacher give me an introductory book? Wait until you have memorized the entire introductory book, and then bar. After saying that, Sun Suanhua turned around and left, heading towards a pavilion. That is his residence. Zhu Yun returned to his room thoughtfully, and the 7 books were still scattered on the table. The reason why he didn't have any objection to Sun Suanhua's decision not to practice swordsmanship was because the sword he just struck was extremely powerful, but it also consumed all the gold spiritual energy in his body. If this sword move can only be used once against an enemy in the future, what's the use? It's better to draw more talismans on your body. When the time comes, if a talisman is thrown down, who can imagine it? Thinking of this, Zhu Yun opened the door of the talisman. Out of interest, he read with gusto, unaware that time flew by. And at this time, Sun Suanhua was sitting in the pavilion, looking at the golden sword. The more he looked at it, the more shocked he became. It's strange. Although this sword is my first forged magic weapon, it can't be so bad. A lot of good materials were used at that time, and almost all of my family's wealth was covered. Although it's not great, it won't be worn out by someone in the chi refining stage. Forget it, never mind, as long as this kid learns my skills, I can get away with it. Destruction of magic weapons is common in the world of immortality, but Sun Suanhua has never heard of someone at the chi refining stage using such a bad sword technique to destroy a low-grade magic weapon. After putting away the golden sword, Sun Suanhua found Zhu Yun again. Seeing him looking at the entrance to the talisman, I couldn't help but nodded frequently, stepped forward, and took out the book on Zhenfa. Little kid, just learn the fireball talisman and body skills, and put the rest aside first. Zhu Yun raised his head, and Sun Suanhua explained with a smile, of the many primary talismans, only the fireball talisman is used for attack, and the body talisman allows you to use it for dodge. Otherwise, you have to learn the earth shield talisman for defense. Time waits for no one. Zhu Yun knew what Sun Suanhua meant. You can draw the talisman anywhere. You can go to the side room to get the materials to use. There are plenty of them here. If you want to practice body skills, go to the Magian Cliff in the back mountain. The terrain there is steep, so it's perfect. Zhu Yun was overjoyed when he heard that he could go out into the formation to practice his body skills. I'm worried that I won't have a chance to enter the Dewu Glazed Mirror. Wouldn't it be a good idea to go to Magian Cliff? Thinking of this, Zhu Yun nodded repeatedly and said, Master, can I go now? Now, Sun Suanhua glared at him, pointed out the window and said, Look, it's getting dark. If you're not afraid of falling off the misty sword cliff, go ahead. Zhu Yun quickly shut up. Okay, you go to Magian Cliff during the day and draw the talisman at night. With your memory, it won't be a big problem to learn the fireball talisman in 3 days. I am optimistic about you. With that said, Sun Suanhua put down some talisman paper and cinnabar and left. Zhu Yun really wanted to enter the Dewu Glazed Mirror, but he felt something was wrong in his heart. After thinking about it, I looked at the introduction of talisman with peace of mind. The next day, dawn had just broken, and only the golden light of the morning glow reflected the white clouds on the horizon. Zhu Yun had already gotten up and arrived outside Sun Suanhua's house. Baby, you are working very hard. Are you up so early? Sun Suan, who had long heard the movement outside the house, opened the door and came out and said, "Master, since childhood, my father has taught his disciples that the best time of the day is in the morning. The early bird catches the worm." Sun Suan Hua chuckled and said, "Your father is right, but do you think, are you an early bird or a bug?" Zhu Yundun was stunned by these words. Sun Suan Hua said again, "Okay, as long as you don't practice swordsmanship in Lingjian sect, you won't be in any danger. If someone really wants to beat you up, just take out your nameplate. You still have some face as a master." After saying that, he waved his hand and told Zuyun to get out of here. Practicing his body skills can be regarded as inheriting one of his skills. Sun Suan Hua wished that Zuyun could be more active. After Zuyun left, Sun Suan Hua sighed and walked towards the weapon refining room. He cursed as he walked. "What a fool! I have been practicing elixirs and swords for the Lingjian sect for 100 years, and now I finally have hope." Zuyun was anxious and trotted all the way to Qin Liken's place. "Fifth junior brother, why are you here so early?" Qin Liken was sleepy and thought he was coming to ask him about Zhang Tianyuan. "Senior brother Liken, how to get to Magian Cliff?" Zuyun scratched his head and asked. "Miscellaneous Sword Cliff? What are you doing there? Although all the disciples in the sect can go, it's not appropriate for you to have just passed the qi refining period." "Why?" "I don't know, but it is said that the sword array was set up by the seniors of Wanjian Mountain here to help our Lingjian sect disciples learn the way of swordsmanship. Senior brother is afraid that you will go in and be hidden in the sword array. The sword accidentally injured me." Shaking his head, Qin Liken said again, "Fifth junior brother, don't be too hasty in cultivating immortality." He thought Zuyun was eager to improve his strength and wanted to avenge Zhang Tianyuan. Zuyun quickly said, "Senior brother Liken, my master asked me to go there, not to practice swordsmanship, and I don't practice swordsmanship anymore." "Don't practice swordsmanship? Then it'll be fine." Qin Liken breathed a sigh of relief and then gave Zuyun the direction. After Zuyun thanked him, he walked very quickly. He wanted to take the opportunity to find a deserted place and enter the day-glazed mirror before the sky got bright. After walking for about half an hour, a cry suddenly came from behind. "Xiaozhu, Xiaozhu, is that you?" Zuyun looked back and was pleasantly surprised. "Big dog, second dog. Are you here too?"